After a successful decade run as a featured documentary, Eyes of the Mothman is now a podcast containing bonus information and, for the first time ever, the complete, unedited field interview tapes with eyewitnesses, experts, and those who were directly impacted by the Mothman incidents that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 1967. Although this podcast is meant to act as a historical record and an archive of the events that transpired, all material contained here is not for reproduction without the written consent by the copyright holder, Redline Studios, Incorporated. All right, we're on episode 12 of the Eyes of the Mothman podcast. We've been revisiting our old interview field tapes from the making of the film back in... Geez, when did we shoot this? Early 2000s, right?
2006, I think it was.
Yes.
And so our next interview subject was Ken Woodard. And Ken was from the Army Corps of Engineers. And we had reached out to him to speak about the topic of the TNT Plant, the McClintic Wildlife Preserve. So obviously in our story, it's a landmark location. It's the first spot that the Mothman was seen and witnessed by the Scarberrys in 1966. And prior to it being an abandoned TNT plant, it was this major military operation, the type of base where people lived on the base. It just went for miles. There were these things called igloos, which were like these cement construction type buildings that chemicals were stored in. The plant's purpose was to manufacture TNT and explosives during World War II. What had happened at some point in the story here of Mothman is that some of these chemicals used leaked out into the wildlife preserve, went into ponds, went into plants and trees there. And one of the theories that evolved out of the Mothman story was that maybe Mothman was a mutated bird, possibly a sandhill crane, which is a bird that's local to the area, that's kind of big, has red around the eyes already. So there was this theory that maybe Mothman was a misidentified, polluted, toxic bird. We reached out to the Army Corps of Engineers, who was responsible for the cleanup of that site, just to talk to someone about what went on there, what was the process, what type of pollutants were found, how toxic was it, what levels were they. And this was our first interview related to that, and is with Ken. Do you guys remember interviewing him? I don't remember where we did the interview. Do you?
We went to his, like where he works. We went to
government office.
To the government office,
oh,
yeah.
We did. Where, but wasn't a military base, was it?
No, it was.
It was?
It was a military base, yeah. And there was there were walls of dry erase board. I think the whole office was just dry erase boards.
Well, that's weird in itself. Did it say on the dry erase board, "Don't forget to lie to the film crew coming to ask you about chemical pollutants"? I don't mean any disrespect to the interview subject at all, but just with the idea of like, okay, now we're interviewing like a government representative about an EPA cleanup. Like, you're always kind of going like, how much am I going to be told that's accurate and truthful? Was that going through your minds at all? That like, are we going to be sold some story that maybe is not accurate?
Yes. When you said, we're going to go interview this guy and he worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, my first thought was, this is going to be bullshit.
Really? What about you, Neil? You're a skeptical person.
Well, I thought that like the historians, whatever, that it's going to add some validity to the thing, because you're getting it from the government. It's like, okay, where else would you like to go? You know, the government is supposed to be about, at least the stereotype is to cover it up or to be cynical, or you're saying you're believing hype, or you're believing legend or story or that kind of stuff. This is a scientist. This is somebody who's doing some real life type of work. He's working for the government. This is the horse's mouth. And even he's saying that, mutations could happen, poisoning of these waters and the wetlands and things like that. So it's, if anybody wants to be a cynic, this guy's not getting on your side.
Yeah. I mean, also, as someone who at the time, I'm in my 20s, I'm not a chemist. I'm not a scientist. Looking back at some of these interviews, and I think it's pretty common to do, and a lot of the local people would do this as well. They would be like, oh, it's like toxic waste almost equivalent of like you think of like Ninja Turtles, green ooze seeping into the thing and a bird gets on them and then turns into a mutant monster. But then when you really start to dive into like the chemistry of like the pollutants that were out there that are used to make TNT, you start to go, all right, it's not, you know what I mean? It's not like a mutagen. It's not like something that would have that effect. But it doesn't. But you have the other interesting thing that we'll get in with another interview where we interviewed someone who actually did catch a mutated fish out in that area. So, you know, and we also talked to other chemists, and I can't remember exactly what their title was, but like we spoke to other experts who also did say, no, some of the things that were manufactured at that TNT plant would cause mutations amongst animals and species.
Yeah, but he wasn't a person who's the public relations person. He wasn't speaking from like a press release. He was somebody who did investigations. So I'm surprised that if he did ask the higher ups, giving him permission to speak about this at all.
Yeah, I was surprised that we actually got these interviews.
Thinking back now, as a full-blown adult.
What the hell were you doing there?
Yes. What were we doing there? And how did we even get that interview without a room full of like PR people and it was just him?
Yeah.
That was weird.
I mean, apparently, I don't know if he would have gotten in trouble for it or he was speaking out of turn.
But they must have known because I think we had to give like our IDs and stuff to even enter the building.
We did.
We were on a list.
Anybody enters the building has to do that.
But we were on a list. Like he must have told them what we're going there for.
Yeah, but did he ask his, anytime you have people who, ask the higher ups, the people who you answer to, hey, is it okay if I talk to the newspapers about this? Almost always they're going to go, no.
Right, no. Yeah. Or there's someone in the room.
Not that we were like important people or anything, but just the fact that there's a camera on you and you're being asked questions.
Right, and we have people for that. We have people that we hired to speak for us, and you're not that person. And so I'm very surprised.
And I think the way I got this was I think I'm now looking back now, like I think I just cold called like the closest Army base I could find and was like, hey, how do I talk to someone from the Army Corps of Engineers? I understand that who was the one who oversaw and worked with the EPA to clean this area up. And I think that just kind of led me to these guys. They probably didn't even clean up anything at all. It was probably a Halloween costume they were wearing. That military base was all just fake. No, I'm just kidding. But I do remember being surprised that we got this interview and that they were willing to speak on camera and that it wasn't a bit more of a...
like a more formal thing.
Yeah, usually you'd have someone in the room kind of going, oh, let's not use that answer or this or that. It was pretty like
because this is
small.
beyond any of the other interviews. Okay, witnesses. Okay, you have historians who love to talk about this. You have teachers who, they're not going to get in trouble for talking about what they talk about every day. So that kind of thing. This is the only kind of strange representative of this whole story that is surprising they spoke to us.
I mean, even when we interview like corporate people, like corporate brands and stuff like that, they
sign a non-disclosure agreement.
And there's always like PR. Someone, right? There's always someone there making sure that they have the right verbiage, like the right, like things are coming out the correct way.
Right. And when you ask them questions, many times they're like, my attorney has advised that we do not discuss that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so they spoke really openly with us, and I appreciated that. The interviews with these guys were not at length, but it was really just to get a better understanding of what happened there, what was found, what type of chemicals. And the other thing that was relative and relevant to the story was not only could Mothman have been a mutated bird in that type of thought process, but the other idea of could these chemicals that are kind of seeping into these ponds and in this area, could this be causing some type of hallucination? Like maybe people were going out there and having some type of mass hallucination in terms of like a plausible explanation as to why people, when they would go to the TNT plant, see this kind of fantastical stuff. Yeah. So looking back on Ken's interview, it might not be the most entertaining, charismatic thing that you get as you might hear when we interview, like, say, a Mothman witness or someone who was covering the UFOs. But, his interview is still relevant and important to the story from a scientific standpoint and from a just a grounded, tangible, people want to always go to the government conspiracy thing. Well, here's someone who's from the Army Corps of Engineers telling you at least his role in what he did in the EPA cleanup in the McClintic area, also known as TNT, where Mothman was first spotted. Hopefully you enjoy this interview. First, just so I have it later to use, just tell me your name again and spell it for me so I get it correct.
Sure. My name is Ken Woodard. First name spelled Ken. Last name spelled Woodard.
Okay. And can you tell me what your title is here?
I'm an environmental engineer here at the Army Corps of Engineers, Huntington District.
Okay, great. So before I get into like the cleanup and the spill stuff of the McClintic area of Point Pleasant, I want to just talk about some of the history of that area before that whole procedure happened. Can you just tell me a little bit about, for people who have never heard of this area, who don't know anything about it, someone who's watching this for the first time, can you just tell me a little bit about the TNT plants that were erected in Mason County during World War II? What were they for? What was their purpose? What did they do and why? And then can you also include about that there was those structures called igloos that are out there as well that stored things? Can you just tell me a bit of history on that?
Okay. The former West Virginia Ordnance Works was constructed to produce TNT, or trinitrotoluene, during World War II. It just produced the powder there on site, and it was shipped off site to be put into artillery, etc. There were 100 magazines, or sometimes called them igloos or bunkers, on the site, and those were constructed to be used for TNT storage, but those were used very little. We made the TNT powder we shipped it off site about as fast as we could make it back then.
Great. And there were two TNT plants. Is that right? Like a north and south plant there on this? Is that right or no?
No, just one plant.
There was one. Okay.
There were 12 manufacturing lines. There's kind of 10 on the south side and 2 on the north side of what we call Wadsworth Road, the road that bisects the site. But the 2 lines on the north were never used.
Was it a fairly big structure? There was a fairly big operation. Like what in terms of size, in terms of producing those materials, was it a fairly big operation in terms of the contribution to the war effort?
Well, the site covered over 8,000 acres. I can't remember the production levels off the top of my head, but.
Can you tell me, after the war ended, there was no longer a use to manufacture the TNT there any longer. The plants, the storage facilities were shut down. I had heard that some of those bunkers were rented out to like other private places and companies like that. Can you just tell me what happened after the plant shuts down? Tell me that there's no need for the manufacturing anymore. Just tell me post shut down what the facility is used for. If it's used for anything, is it abandoned? Is it just shut?
Referring to the magazine area specifically, or the entire site?
Just both of them. If you can cover both, that would be good.
Okay. After the war ended, the site was no longer needed to make TNT. The government attempted to access the property. They went through and cataloged everything on the site, buildings, equipment, etc. And as part of that, the magazine area with the 100 bunkers, some of those were, I'm stumbling around now.
Sorry. I had heard different things. Like I had heard some of the magazines were rented out to like different companies that stored contents and materials there.
Much of the property is transferred to the West Virginia, I think it was the Wildlife Commission then, it's now the Division of Natural Resources. They in turn leased some of those bunkers out. A portion of it was in private hands and became the Point Pleasant landfill, and that property has been sold again. There's a private person who owns that now is doing some munitions recycling up there.
Were there ever any, aside from like the TNT materials that were stored in those bunkers, after it shut down and was leased out to some of these other private companies, do you know, I had heard like conflicting facts. Were there ever like any like chemical companies or anything that ever used that to store materials in, or no? Are you aware of?
I don't know of any chemical companies having stored anything in the bunkers. I know there were, the records I've seen, limited quantities of explosives, maybe a little bit of pesticides, things like that, but small quantities.
So I'm going to ask you a similar question again, just to cover it one more time. Can you just tell me, that when the war ends, there's no more need to keep the plant in operation, so it's shut down, and just you can just kind of tell me, once it's shut down, the history after it. The plant's no longer in use. I guess it's just abandoned. but some of the magazines are still used for, and then tell me what for.
Well, the plant was shut down after the war because the government no longer needed it to make the TNT, and they attempted to access the property. It was determined that a lot of it could never be decontaminated to the level that they would want, so instead they made it a wildlife management area and gave it over to the state of West Virginia. Some of that property transferred to the state included the magazine area, and understand the DNR has leased some of those bunkers out for other use. Part of those bunkers did go in the private control by the electric company AEP. That's been leased to McClintic now, is my understanding.
Okay. And can you tell me, while the plant was operational and then after it wasn't, you had just listed possibly some things that the igloos or the magazines, as you call them, were used for. Can you just tell me during the plant's operational stage, what were those igloos used for? Is that a correct term to call them that, or is that
That's fine?
Slang? Okay, because that's kind of like everyone calls them, I guess. So
Right.
I want to make sure I got it right. Can you just tell me about the igloos that are used during the plant's operational years and then post shutdown of the plant? What are they used for?
Sure. During operation of the plant, the igloos or magazines were constructed to store the TNT powder before it was shipped off site, but they were never really used much. They were shipping it off site about as fast as they could make it. After the site ceased operation, understand they were probably used by hunters, etc. And the West Virginia DNR has leased some of them out to individuals, and a portion of those are currently used by a private individual for a recycling operation.
Okay. And overall, do you know approximately how many total igloos were on the site that were built there?
There are 100 igloos on the site.
I guess what I want to get into now is just a little bit about the cleanup, but the idea of why there was environmental cleanup procedures there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just tell me a little bit about that? No one, I guess, from what I had read, it was kind of unknown for a while that there was a problem there in that area. And can you just tell me what was going on? Was there like a gradual leak of contents from some of those storage facilities and some of the plant there that started to leak out into the environment? What happened?
Well, production of TNT on the site led to contamination of soil and groundwater in some areas. Not from the storage areas, really, because we didn't store TNT there very much. There have been several attempts throughout the past 50-plus years to clean that up. Even during the 1950s, there was something called the Harris Board Report. They went out and said these areas could be decontaminated at these levels, and they went out and did that and said those were clean and moved on. Each decade, it seemed like someone would come back and look again and try to clean up a little bit more and a little bit more. So eventually, during the 1980s, a leak of they called a Kool-Aid-like substance, red water, which is the TNT wastewater, was found near the Pond 13 area. And that's what really led to the site being placed on EPA's national priorities list. It's one of 2 sites nominated by the state to be placed on the NPL.
And can you just explain to me, for people who don't know, kind of something like how does it happen? Is it just from the manufacturing of that materials, where is it in the air? Is it just like how does the the kind of spillage into the outside areas of the plant, how does that happen? Just in basic terms.
Okay, just environmental practices then are not obviously what they are today. So just the making of TNT, especially during the war effort, you're in a hurry to get it made and get it done, and that would just lead to there'll be some spills and leaks from sewer lines or production buildings, etc. The contaminated soil around some buildings and eventually leached into the groundwater.
So it's really just in the process of making what they were making. It's what leached. At what point was it realized that there was a potential dangerous situation there, a potential problem that needed some attention? When did that happen? When was it finally understood and discovered out there that there was a possible problem?
Well, it sounds like they knew, from what I've read, they knew about the contamination even from the time the plant closed, because they knew it could never be cleaned up to restored to pristine conditions. So that's why it ended up a large part of being transferred over to the state for use as a wildlife management area, because it wouldn't have to be as clean for that as it would for if you were constructing houses in the area.
And the Pond 13 thing that you were telling me about, that seems like to be the most serious problem that was there. When was that? Do you remember when that was kind of discovered?
That the leaking of the red water there was discovered during the 1980s. I forget the exact year off the top of my head.
That's fine. So with that in mind, I want to try to put that question in with your last answer as well. Can you tell me I think it'd be nice because I think it's a fact that's kind of misunderstood a lot, that people think that this wasn't found out until like many, many years after. So can you tell me that, even during the plant's operational stages, it was believed that there was a potential problem, or if that's true, like you were saying, with, even then they knew that there was some, cleanup that would be needed, and tell me basically the same answer that you did before. And then at the end, if you could tag on to the end of it, and then at some point in the 1980s, the redwood were found in 13.
Okay. Even from the decade after they ceased operation up there, they knew there was some type of contamination. They tried to remediate it as best they could, clean it up as best they could, and figured out that some areas at that point, at least with the technology they had then, they could not clean up. It seemed like about every 10 years or so, they came back and did another study and said, yeah, this is clean, or they issued decontamination certificates for some areas, declaring them clean. And fast forwarding to the 1980s, when the red water leak was discovered in the Pond 13 area, and that's what put the site on the EPA's national priorities list.
Can you tell me, so was it, were it chemicals that were found? Like, what's the best word, like the things that were found, the contaminants, what's the best word to use for what's found, like in the soils, in the waters there? Chemicals, contaminants, pollutants,
either one, if you want to call them chemicals or contaminants.
Okay. Okay, whichever you put it. So can you tell me what type of chemicals were found in the waters and the grounds over at the McClintic Wildlife Preserve area? And in your answer, can you tell me where they were found? Like, is it just reiterate? Soil. Is it soil based in the water? Is it in the air? Just so people know.
The chemicals found at the site have been those expected to be produced during the TNT production process, which TNT is trinitrotoluene. Most people think of TNT, they think of dynamite. There's some dinitrotoluene, which is similar in structure. I don't want to get too much into the chemistry of it, obviously.
It's okay. It's okay to list them. You can. That's
sure.
To name them is fine.
Okay.
I get this. It was fine. It was fine. You weren't going too far.
Okay.
So,
do you want me to start over with that
sure.
one? So the chemicals that we found up there have been in the soil and groundwater, nothing in the air to speak of. Those have been what we call nitroaromatic compounds, primarily TNT or trinitrotoluene, because that's what we're making on the site. But during that TNT production process, there's steps the product goes through. At one stage, it's dinitrotoluene or DNT, 2,4 or 2,6 DNT. So we found some of that up there, and there's several other nitroaromatic compounds we found there.
Okay. Wait on the side. Yeah. Should we do it again? No. Okay.
You haven't jumped over here and slapped me yet.
Not yet. Right? Yeah. Okay. So some of the things that you had just listed for me, can you just tell me if you know, like what are there any effects that those things in the environment, in the soil, in the water, are there any effects that they can have on the environmental areas there that you know?
They can. Some of them could have either chronic effects if a person was to consume them in large enough quantities over a long term. The DNT could be a carcinogen, but that would, again, require somebody to consume that over a long term. And we monitor the groundwater on the site, and we have some groundwater pump and treat plants also. We ensure that the DNR has no intention of putting any wells on the site, so no one's going to be drinking the water that's directly under it. And we make sure that none of that contamination is moving off the site either, where it's not going to get into homes. We did a well survey and sampling a few years ago, sampled at the homes of 23 people who live near the site. We found no nitroaromatic compounds in any of their wells.
Does it have any effects on birds if they're consuming, like, say the bird's drinking Pond 13 or something?
Well, we did. Pond 13 is the only surface water body up there about which we were concerned. We have no fishing signs up there. But we even did fish tissue sampling during the late 90s, I think it was 97, 99 timeframe, and found that there were no nitroaromatic compounds building up in the fish there. We do address ecological concerns because everything we, as the Corps is the lead agency for the site, everything we do up there has to be agreed to by the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection and U.S. EPA Region 3. U.S. EPA brings in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to make sure that we're addressing any, what they call ecological receptors, or the bugs and the bunnies, your fish, your birds, etc. Make sure we're not causing any unacceptable risk to them.
Can they cause, like, mutations? Can they cause, like, what's the effects that they can have? Is that some of the potential problems that could happen?
As far as the impacts that TNT, DNT, etc. might have on the animals, creatures up there at the site, what something we've looked at is bioaccumulation, whether those could build up within the creatures, the animals, and cause some sort of ailment. And that doesn't really occur with those type of compounds. So it's a hunting area now up there in McClintic Wildlife Management Area. It's what I understand from DNR, it's one of the best hunting areas in the state. So the deer hunters especially were concerned about that. It doesn't bioaccumulate, so it's not something you or I could get from shooting a deer and eating it. I don't know of anything, any evidence where any of that would cause mutations of any sort.
Okay. In like worst case scenario with something like that, where DNT or TNT is like in the water, what is like worst case scenario? Not even.
Yeah, I probably couldn't give you a real good answer on that. I'm probably not as well versed in the ecological impacts.
But I mean, like in terms of cleaning up the chemicals, what makes something more of like a priority over something else? Like you had said, 13 specifically was kind of put on the EPA list there. What makes something more of a priority over, you know what I mean? Like, is there
like a different area of the site?
Like, why is this area more of a concern than this area? Is it just the amount of pollutants that's found there, and like talking like numbers wise, or like what? How are those things just determined? Just even just in your field in general, it doesn't even have to be there.
Usually, the way we prioritize our cleanups a lot to what risk it poses. Do you have any what we call receptors nearby, whether it's human or creatures, animals, and then the levels they're at? We try to take care of what we would call the hottest or most contaminated areas first.
This podcast is a companion piece to the original feature-length documentary film from 2011 of the same title. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to see the film that started it all by visiting www.eyesofthemothman.com. Can you tell me more about Pond 13? Of that site, is that kind of like the area that was given the most attention? Is that the kind of, per se, worst?
I wouldn't say Pond 13 is the worst area, but that's the discovery of the red water there is what led to the site being placed in the MPO, caused the Department of Defense and the Army to take a larger look at the site, take a look at the site as a whole, the former Ordnance Works site.
Can you tell me then what area of the site is kind of, I guess, the most concern to the organizations that are cleaning up the area? What's the focus point? What's kind of the main concern area, if there is one?
I think our primary concern up there, if we had to pick one, would be the preventing direct contact with soils, because there is hunting, et cetera, going on there. So within the TNT manufacturing area and at the former wastewater reservoirs, we cap those areas that cut off any direct contact by humans and by the ecological receptors. Then also we have we've tackled the groundwater issues there. We have 2 groundwater pump and treat plants to take care of groundwater in the vicinity of those old reservoirs. And recently we completed a cleanup of some soil at the Pond 13 area, and we installed some new extraction wells there that feed into the pump and treat plant, pull the groundwater out and clean it.
Is this something that, like, when there's a spill, like if it happened during the time when the plant is operational, is it something that's more intensified then? Is it more of a concern then? Does it like gradually start to dissipate? Is it less of a I guess in terms of intensity, in terms of like the pollutants, like does it kind of fade away? Can you just explain to me how that worked? Like was it highly concentrated more so when the plant was operational because that was kind of more close in proximity to when it had gone there, as opposed to now where it's been some years?
Usually when you have a spill, it's most concentrated when it first spills. Because after that, it'll percolate down through the soil and into the groundwater. As it does, you only have a certain mass of that chemical or contaminant, so that will spread out some and diffuse. And also biologically it'll break down over time also for the organic compounds. Some compounds break down more than others or more quickly than others.
What was the acreage for the plant when it was operational? What was the size approximately?
The site was over 8,000 acres when it was operational. Included a lot of buffer zone with that though.
Okay, so can you tell me, out of the 8,000 acres there, can you tell me approximately size and proportions of what areas were being cleaned up?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
Originally, we had, focused our attention, I guess, on several hundred acres that were production, wastewater reservoirs, things like that. Yeah, so not very small percentage of the overall site, because over 8,000 acre site had buffer zones. You didn't want people living right next to a TNT plant. Had housing areas for the workers and the Army staff who lived at the site or worked at the site.
Okay.
Motor pools, etc. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a similar question just to kind of focus a little more for probably
Sure.
needed for it. out of the, can you tell me, like, it's maybe if we start something with, like, out of the original 8,000 acres of land there, the contaminated area that's being cleaned up is only a small portion of the land. And then if you can tell me what area that was, like, is it literally like where the plant used to stand?
Originally, the site was over 8,000 acres, and that was what was originally put on the MPL boundary as the fence line of the old plant. There were a lot of areas that were not part of production. So in 1994, we whittled the site down to about 2,800 acres or so. Since then, we've done a couple other MPL partial deletions as we've studied areas and determined that there's no unacceptable risk caused there, and remove those in the MPL boundary. So the site's about half that size now, down about 11 or 1,200 acres, I believe. The areas we're primarily focusing on are the TNT manufacturing area, where the 10 manufacturing lines were, the red and yellow water reservoirs, where we've capped the contaminated sediment there from the red and yellow water, where the wastewater is produced in the TNT production process. And manufacturing area, that's primarily it.
Okay.
I was thinking I was going somewhere else with that.
Okay. Is this a site that will it ever? You had said it's been kind of looked at and kind of cleaned and then back and forth a little bit throughout for some years now.
Mm-hmm.
Is this an area that will it ever be like 100% cleaned of the contaminants there?
Based on the technology we have now, we'll never be able to return the site to pristine conditions, pre-World War II conditions up there. But we can clean it up where there's no unacceptable risk caused to those who would use the site for hunting, etc., for DNR hunting, picnicking, four-wheeling, whatever they do up there.
Can you tell me how long a procedure has this been, and do you estimate that it will be?
The Corps of Engineers took over the site in 1992, I believe. So we've been working up there continuously since then, working with DEP and EPA. We have the pump and treat plants for a minimum are going to go for 25 or 30 years. So at least restarted in 2000, so to get to 2025 or 2030. Maybe not the investigation, but the cleanup process.
Are there any effects that can have on a person just being in the immediate area? Like, or other, I know, places where things have been spilled where it can affect a person's perception? Like,
I don't know any effects that someone could have just from being in that area, just from the TNT and all those compounds do not volatilize, so it's not something you want to inhale. They don't become airborne readily. If you were to get in direct contact with them, there'd be other issues there as far as, having them directly on your skin or ingesting the water, things like that. But as far as just walking around on the site, no.
In terms of aside from maybe physical reaction to it, those being in that area can't do any, as far as there's no evidence that ever shows that being in that area can affect someone's vision or affect someone's mental state, I guess, because some people have kind of for some reason thought that to equate it to like drugged by it, you know what I mean, to feel kind of lightheaded, I guess, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just clarify that for me, that there's no evidence that being in that area can affect someone's
I wouldn't really know anything about that.
Okay.
Not really studied that part
That's
of it.
wrong, though, right? I mean, because people people don't. That's not correct, right?
Not that I know of.
Right.
No, I hate to say it's flat out wrong without having studied that specifically. But
okay, the pollutants that are there, can they have any effect on the environment in terms of UV rays and such as things like that? There, I guess things that fall into physics, those chemicals, may affect anything the air there. We were talking about soil and water. Are there any effects that those things had on the air or any other elements like that?
Well, the chemicals there do not readily volatilize, not readily enter the air. They're semi-volatile compounds, so they're not like to get airborne and inhaled.
What's if someone came in direct contact with some of the stuff out there, what are some possibilities? I guess can you just tell me?
I'm trying to remember. Someone to come in direct contact with the chemicals that are out there. It could be as minor as a skin rash or something. The DNT is a known carcinogen, though. Someone were to come in contact with enough of it on a regular basis. That's, I guess, worst case scenario.
Was it the power plant in that area, and then it became this wildlife management area afterwards? What was the history there? Because I had read different things too, where it was the power plant area and a wildlife refuge, and then they got more property. What's the correct timeline?
Okay, a lot of that property prior to the TNT plant was farmland, etc. Then it was the TNT plant for a few years there, and then most of it transferred over to the McClintic Wildlife, or over to the state, which made it the McClintic Wildlife Management Area. And the state's added to their site that's gone out beyond the former TNT plant.
When was it designated the McClintic Wildlife Area? Do you know, approximately?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. It used to be the McClintic Wildlife Station, I think. Probably when we first transferred it, that's probably 40s or 50s time frame.
Was there ever a time when they were existing next to one another, like at the same time, where it was, there's TNT plant land here, and this is McClintic Preserve area, or like, I'm just trying for my facts and more. So
yeah, no, I've never seen anything where the TNT plant and McClintic coexisted.
So it was like most TNT plants shut down, and later on, land was kind of like set aside for that. Is that right?
Yeah, it's my understanding the federal government transferred the property to the state government. That's what allowed them to establish McClintic.
Okay, cool. Okay, I think that's it. Unless there's anything that you think I forgot that's important.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions, and when you answer them, if you could refer to Matt, not to me, like
okay.
you happened to. One of them is, can any of these chemicals cause eye irritation or something that can be construed or is in close relation to conjunctivitis or pink eye?
And I'm not sure. They probably, if you had some direct contact with the soil, anytime you get soil in your eye, it could cause some eye problems, definitely. But if you had some DNT in the soil, I'm not sure.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. For more information about our program, or to find out where you can watch the original documentary film or purchase a limited edition signed DVD copy, please visit www.eyesofthemothman.com.